The door of eternal night. There are doors that open to the unknown. Some lead to darkness, others to unspeakable horrors. But few, if any, can compare to the one that opened for Noah Carter. Noah was a skeptic, a man of science, a collector of things that didn't make sense. He worked as a freelance photographer, often hired by people to capture the forgotten places, the abandoned hospitals, the derelict houses, the ruins that time had claimed. But unlike many of his peers, he didn't go searching for ghosts. He didn't believe in them. He wasn't interested in paranormal myths or hauntings. He believed in what he could see, what he could touch, and what could be explained. And so, when the invitation came to explore a house that was rumored to be haunted, the Fenton House, a crumbling mansion on the outskirts of town, he went with only a camera and his usual disinterest in anything that couldn't be captured with his lens. The Fenton House had a history, a dark one. The mansion had been abandoned for decades after the Fenton family mysteriously disappeared one night, without a trace. Neighbors claimed to have seen lights flickering in the windows at night, and strange sounds echoed through the trees. But it was just a house, Noah told himself. Just another rundown building ripe for an eerie photo shoot. He arrived at dusk, the sky bruising into deep purples and blacks, and stood before the house, an imposing structure of crumbling stone and overgrown ivy. A chill had already begun to seep into the air, and the once grand architecture now seemed warped, as if the house had bent under the weight of its own history. The wooden door, creaking slightly in the wind, beckoned him in. Noah stepped inside. The interior was as he expected: dust, decay, and darkness. His flashlight revealed a series of broken windows, shattered mirrors, and peeling wallpaper. He snapped a few photos, uninterested in the details, until he noticed something odd. There was a door at the end of the hallway, an arched doorframe with a faded brass doorknob. It was out of place, its wood dark and polished, as if it had been untouched by time while everything around it rotted. No decay, no dust. The air around it felt thicker, as though it exhaled a slow, heavy breath. His curiosity piqued. Without thinking, Noah approached the door. It was as if something was calling him, a voice he couldn't hear, but could feel vibrating through his chest. He reached for the knob, feeling the chill of it against his palm. The door opened without resistance, and Noah stepped through, his camera still dangling from his neck. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The room was small, bare, lit only by the dull glow of the moonlight streaming through a narrow window. It was devoid of furniture, but the air was different. It was thick with something he couldn't place. The temperature dropped drastically, and an unsettling pressure pressed against his chest. Noah raised his camera, taking a few experimental shots, but then he saw it. The shadows in the corners of the room began to shift. A figure, translucent and faint, appeared in the farthest corner. It was a woman, her form barely visible, but her eyes were like pits, dark and endless, staring directly at him. Her lips parted in a silent scream, her body contorting unnaturally, as if she was trapped in a cage of her own making. Her gaze never left him. Noah froze. Before he could move, the air around him thickened further, a low hum filling his ears. A voice, deep and distorted, whispered from the walls. "Leave, before it's too late, before the door closes." Panic clawed at him. He turned, trying to escape, but the door he had entered through was gone. In its place was a wall, smooth, solid, impossible. His heart raced, and sweat began to bead on his forehead. He wasn't alone anymore. The shadows in the corners grew larger, and figures began to emerge. People. They weren't quite alive, but they weren't exactly dead either. Their bodies twisted and deformed, their skin ashen and stretched thin, revealing the bones beneath. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light, and their mouths were gaping, devoid of sound, but their lips never stopped moving. It was as if they were trying to scream, trying to warn him. The woman from the corner stepped forward, and her fingers scraped against the stone floor, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. Her face twisted into something grotesque. Tears of black liquid leaked from her hollow eyes, and her teeth, sharp and jagged, gleamed in the darkness. She reached for him, her long, bony fingers extending, aching for him. "You shouldn't have opened it," she hissed. Noah backed away, heart thundering in his chest. His mind screamed to run, but the room was closing in, the walls pressing tighter with each passing second. He ran for the spot where the door had been, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But there was no escape. The people in the room, paranormal, twisted souls, moved closer, their faces contorting with agony and hunger. The room itself seemed to shift, its dimensions warping, as though he was no longer in the same place but in some other dimension. The temperature dropped so low that his breath fogged in front of him, freezing his every step. And then the door appeared again. It was open, beckoning him with an unnatural light beyond, a light that seemed to promise freedom. But as Noah rushed toward it, the shadows lunged forward, their hands clawing at his clothes, dragging him back. "No, no, no," he screamed. But his voice was drowned in the cacophony of whispers, the chilling chorus of those lost souls. One figure, a man, his face obscured by a veil of shadow, stepped forward. He was tall, with skin stretched tight over bone, his eyes glowing like lanterns in the dark. He spoke, his voice low, smooth, and almost comforting. "There is no escape. Once the door is opened, you belong to it now. You belong to us." Noah's mind raced. He couldn't die here. He couldn't let this be the end. His fingers tightened around his camera, and in one desperate movement, he hurled it through the door. For a brief moment, the world stood still. The camera flew through the air, its lens shining with the briefest flash of light before it vanished into the doorway. The figures in the room paused, their faces twisted with confusion. Noah seized the moment, shoving past the nearest figure, his body nearly giving out from the overwhelming cold. His hands reached out, desperate, and he made it. He tumbled through the door, feeling the oppressive weight of the room lift from his shoulders, and slammed into the ground outside, gasping for breath. He looked up. The mansion was gone. There was no door, no Fenton house, just the forest around him, silent and still. But in his hand was the camera. The lens was cracked, the screen shattered, but the photos still remained. He raised it, trembling, and scrolled through the pictures. And there, on the very last shot, was the image of the door. Open. Beyond it, he saw them. The figures, the haunted souls. Their faces pressed against the glass, their eyes wide with fury. And in the center of it all, a figure he knew all too well. Noah Carter, trapped forever in the dimension of eternal night.